The restaurant shimmered under soft golden light, the kind that made laughter sound richer and conversations feel expensive. Every table told a story of comfort, diamond bracelets catching candlelight, cufflinks glinting beside polished wine glasses, perfumes whispering of wealth and ease. Yet, in the far corner, by the window that overlooked the rain-slicked street, sat a man who didn't seem to belong to any of it. His name was Malcolm, though tonight he felt more like a shadow than a person. The suit jacket he wore had once been sharp, years ago, when interviews still held promise and dreams hadn't learned to shrink. Now, its fabric had dulled at the elbows, its collar slightly frayed, but he had pressed it anyway that morning. He had only $5 in his pocket. Not 500. Not 50. Just 5. Enough for a tip, a cup of coffee, or maybe a small mercy if the night went terribly wrong. He wasn't there to eat. He was there to hope. A coworker had set him up on a blind date, insisting he deserved a good woman. Malcolm had laughed it off at first, but something about the idea made him believe, if only for one night, that his life could still surprise him. That maybe, for once, someone would see him for who he was, not for what he lacked. But as he waited, with nothing but a half-empty water glass before him, each tick of the restaurant's clock grew heavier. Waiters passed by like silent judges, their eyes flickering toward the empty table and back again. He could feel the weight of their curiosity, the invisible question in their glance. What's he doing here? Across the room, a woman noticed him. Her presence was effortless, grace in motion, confidence wrapped in a crisp white blouse and dark curls that fell neatly over her shoulders. She looked like someone who had fought for her place in this world and won. But what caught her attention wasn't his appearance. It was his eyes. Eyes that carried exhaustion and pride in equal measure. Eyes that told a story of trying, when trying no longer seemed enough. And before she even realized it, her night had changed too. Malcolm had not always been the man sitting alone in a restaurant, guarding a secret of poverty beneath a pressed jacket. Once he had been a man with direction, a mechanic known for fixing anything that had wheels and hope. His hands had built engines, repaired lives, and turned noise into rhythm. But life has a cruel way of testing those who live quietly, those who do not scream when they fall. 2 years earlier, the small auto shop where Malcolm worked closed down after the owner was forced to sell. A corporate chain had moved in, demanding certifications, experience sheets, and degrees Malcolm didn't have. The kind of papers that say you're worth something, even when your hands already proved it. From that moment, the decline was slow but steady. The savings he'd built drained into rent, then groceries, then bills. The job offers stopped. Friends grew scarce. And dignity began to cost more than he could afford. Yet, through it all, Malcolm never let despair fully claim him. He kept showing up, even if the world had stopped noticing. So when his coworker, a janitor at the building where Malcolm picked up occasional repair jobs, told him about a blind date, he laughed, then agreed. Maybe, he thought, life was giving him one last chance to feel normal. That was how he found himself in a downtown restaurant whose name he could barely pronounce, watching his reflection in the water glass, pretending he belonged. Every second stretched thin with expectation and quiet shame. At the next table, Evelyn, the woman who had noticed him, sat alone as well. She had not planned to dine there that evening. Her day had been filled with board meetings, sharp voices, and colder decisions. As the CEO of a mid-sized marketing firm, she was admired and envied in equal measure. To her staff, she was power in heels. But behind that strength was exhaustion, the kind born from doing everything alone. Evelyn was a single mother to a 10-year-old boy named Noah, a child with laughter bright enough to outshine her darkest days. Yet lately, even his laughter couldn't quiet the echo of loneliness that crept in when the world grew still. Tonight, she'd stopped by the restaurant only to grab dinner before heading home to finish reports. But fate had its own design. When she saw Malcolm, something inside her paused. He didn't fit the scenery, and that was precisely what made her notice him. The world around her was filled with people who performed wealth. He looked like a man who had fought for every inch of his existence. As she watched, She saw the waiter approach his table again, posture straight, tone polite, but the kind of polite that carried hidden edges. Malcolm smiled faintly, lifted his empty glass, and asked for another refill. The waiter nodded, then turned away, almost relieved. The discomfort was subtle, but it rippled through the room like a whisper of hierarchy. Evelyn's chest tightened. She had seen that look before, the one that silently told black men they didn't belong in certain spaces. The one that said, "We know you can't afford to be here." The blind date didn't show up. The minutes ticked by, and each one hollowed the air around Malcolm. Still, he stayed straight-backed, unmoving, trying to preserve a sense of dignity in a place that stripped it from him piece by piece. Evelyn found herself lingering even after finishing her meal. Something about him felt unfinished, like a chapter that needed a reader. Her heart, though usually guarded, felt the faint ache of recognition, of survival. When Malcolm finally reached into his pocket, she noticed the movement, slow, hesitant. He unfolded a $5 bill, its edges worn soft from too much handling. He looked at it for a long moment, then laid it carefully on the table. His meal had never arrived. He had ordered nothing, eaten nothing, but left a tip anyway. For reasons she couldn't yet explain, Evelyn couldn't let him leave. She rose, intending to stop him, to perhaps say something, anything, but as she stood, their eyes met for the first time. The connection was silent yet immense, as though two worlds had collided without sound. And for a brief, delicate instant, everything around them, the chatter, the clinking glasses, the faint piano music, seemed to fade, leaving only that moment suspended in time. It was the kind of moment that changes everything. The night air outside carried the faint chill of early spring, brushing against Malcolm's skin like reality reclaiming what the restaurant's warmth had temporarily stolen. He stepped onto the sidewalk, pulling his jacket closer, head slightly bowed. Behind him, laughter from the diners spilled into the street. Effortless, careless, a sound that belonged to people who had never known hunger or humiliation. His feet moved slowly, unsure where to go. Home was a single rented room in a crumbling building where the walls whispered other people's sorrows through thin plaster. He could already imagine the flickering light bulb, the hum of loneliness that waited there. Still, he walked, because walking at least meant moving forward. Inside the restaurant, Evelyn remained standing by the table, her pulse uneven. She didn't understand what she was doing, only that she couldn't watch him disappear into the night. Something inside her, a feeling long buried under layers of control and corporate polish, compelled her to follow. She left a few bills beside her untouched dessert and stepped out, the city air wrapping around her like a dare. She spotted him half a block away, shoulders slightly hunched, his figure dissolving into the neon haze of downtown. He wasn't a man begging for help. He was simply surviving, quietly, like so many she'd seen rise early and fade late, invisible to the world that thrived on appearances. Evelyn hesitated, then began walking in the same direction. Her heels clicked against the pavement, a sound Malcolm noticed even above the distant rumble of traffic. When he turned, surprise flickered across his face, then confusion, then something else entirely, gratitude mixed with disbelief. Evelyn stopped a few paces away, unsure what to say. But she didn't need words. Her expression said enough, that she had seen him, really seen him. For the first time that evening, Malcolm smiled without trying to hide his weariness. It wasn't a smile of charm or pride, but one of quiet endurance. Evelyn responded with the faintest nod, and in that unspoken exchange, a fragile thread formed between two strangers, one made of empathy, curiosity, and something neither could name yet. Over the next few days, fate refused to let that thread break. Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about him, the man with $5 and too much dignity for his own good. She replayed the image of him leaving money for a meal he hadn't eaten. The memory lingered like a question she couldn't answer. On the following Wednesday, while rushing through the city for a late client meeting, she saw him again, outside a grocery store, carrying a small bag of rice and a carton of milk. He moved with the careful rhythm of someone counting every step, every cent. That night, after her meeting, she found herself driving back to the same spot. He was still there, sitting on a bench near the bus stop, staring at the streetlights. For the first time in years, Evelyn did something impulsive. She parked, got out, and approached. Malcolm looked up, surprised. The recognition in his eyes softened the lines on his face. Evelyn sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. They exchanged no words, yet something about the silence felt right. Two lives from different worlds had intersected, and neither wanted to retreat. Days turned into weeks, and that silence slowly became connection. She began to see him more often, sometimes at the cafe near her office, sometimes outside the community center where he had started volunteering to teach young boys basic car repair. She learned, through quiet observation, that he had once dreamed of opening his own garage, of mentoring others who had been overlooked just like him. He, in turn, began noticing her routines, the brief smile she gave to the barista, the way she closed her laptop at exactly 8 p.m., the exhaustion that never reached her eyes because she wouldn't let it. Still, the world around them remained sharp-edged. When people saw them together, this polished CEO and the man who wore old work boots, there were stares, whispers, even smirks. Evelyn had lived long enough in corporate spaces to recognize judgment disguised as curiosity. It burned hotter now because it wasn't directed at her success. It was aimed at her choice. One afternoon, as they walked out of a small diner, a man from Evelyn's office happened to see them. His raised eyebrows said everything he didn't dare say aloud. The next day, the office buzzed with murmurs. Evelyn's assistant avoided eye contact. Meetings felt colder. Respect, once automatic, now came with an asterisk. Malcolm noticed the change in her demeanor the next time they met. She smiled, but it was the kind that tried to hide the ache underneath. He understood, though she didn't tell him. Life had taught him to read pain without needing words. One evening, Evelyn watched Malcolm repair a community center van surrounded by kids eager to learn. She stood a few feet away, watching his hands move, steady, sure, patient. The children laughed, asking questions, their faces lit with admiration. In that moment, she saw something rare, purpose unshaken by circumstance. Yet as the bond between them deepened, so did the tension of their different worlds. Evelyn's board of directors began to question her focus, subtly implying that her personal associations might reflect poorly on the company's image. The coded language was familiar, polite, poisonous, and deeply racial. It wasn't just about Malcolm's social class. It was about his color, his place in a system designed to remind him where he didn't belong. The weight of those unspoken biases fell heavily on her shoulders. She'd fought for everything she had: education, success, independence, but now she was being asked to choose between perception and truth, between how the world saw her and what her heart had finally begun to feel. Malcolm, ever perceptive, began to pull back. He didn't want to be the reason her world turned against her. Pride and fear waged quiet war inside him. He told himself she deserved better, someone who could meet her where she stood, someone not burdened by scarcity. But Evelyn saw it differently. To her, Malcolm represented everything the world had forgotten to value: honor, resilience, and grace without pretense. As spring gave way to summer, their paths crossed less often, each held captive by the silent storm growing between them. Yet neither could let go completely. Their connection, forged from empathy, was now tested by the very injustice that had brought it to life. And though neither could admit it yet, they both knew that the next time fate brought them together, it would demand a decision. Because love, in a world built on inequality, never comes without consequence. Summer came heavy with heat, the kind that made even the city's glass towers feel suffocating. Evelyn's office, once her sanctuary, had grown hostile in quiet ways. Conversations stopped when she entered the room. Eyes followed her with concealed judgment. Her success had once made her untouchable, but now, the whispers about the man she was seen with eroded the invisible armor she'd built over years of struggle.
It wasn't just gossip.
It was the way her authority began to be questioned in board meetings. The subtle exclusion from informal gatherings where real decisions were made. The condescending tone in emails from male colleagues who suddenly felt emboldened. None of it mentioned Malcolm by name, but every word carried the shadow of him. When the quarterly shareholders' dinner approached, Evelyn almost didn't attend. But leadership demanded presence, not absence. She dressed in quiet defiance, a sleek black gown that made her look untouchable again, even though her heart trembled beneath the surface. The dinner was held at the Grand Haven Hotel, a place that dripped with luxury and old money. Beneath chandeliers that sparkled like frozen judgments, Evelyn navigated the crowd of powerful men and women who saw her not as one of them, but as an exception, a successful black woman who had learned to play their game without ever being truly accepted. Halfway through the evening, she stepped aside from the noise to breathe. That's when she saw him, Malcolm, standing across the lobby. He looked out of place, yet noble in his own way, dressed in a modest suit. He was there by coincidence, working part-time for the hotel's valet service to make ends meet. Their eyes met, and in that instant, all the walls she'd built began to tremble. He gave her a small nod, acknowledging her silently, intending to slip away before anyone noticed. But someone did. A senior board member named Jonathan Keene, known for his influence and cruelty disguised as charm, followed Evelyn's gaze and smirked. "Isn't that the man you've been keeping company with?" he asked loudly enough for those nearby to hear. The question wasn't curiosity. It was accusation. The air thickened. Every head turned. Evelyn froze, her breath catching between rage and humiliation. Malcolm, realizing the attention had shifted, instinctively stepped back toward the exit. But Jonathan wasn't finished. "Interesting taste," he sneered lightly. "I suppose philanthropy takes many forms these days." A few chuckles followed, small, poisonous sounds that stabbed at the edges of dignity. Evelyn's blood burned hot in her veins. Every part of her training told her to stay silent, to protect her position, to let the moment pass. But another part, a deeper, truer part, rose like fire from within. She turned, her voice steady but cold enough to slice through the laughter. What she said next would be remembered. Her tone carried across the hall, quiet but commanding, each word measured. She reminded the room that class, status, and appearance meant nothing when integrity was absent. That the worth of a person could never be measured by their income, only by their humanity. And that the real shame belonged not to those who struggled, but to those who judged struggle from comfort. The laughter died instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Malcolm, watching from near the exit, felt both awe and sorrow. He wanted to be proud of her, he was proud, but he also saw the cost written in the rigid line of her shoulders. She had justified an entire hierarchy for him. Later that night, when the event ended, Evelyn found him in the back alley behind the hotel. The air was thick with the scent of rain and exhaust. The dim light caught the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead as he wiped his hands on a towel. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Neither spoke. She didn't have to tell him that what she did had consequences. He didn't have to tell her that he wanted to disappear to protect her. Both already knew. Malcolm's eyes softened as he looked at her, a quiet sadness glimmering behind them. He had lived his entire life knowing how the world treated men like him, how it punished them for being seen near someone who had more. He couldn't bear to watch that same world punish her too. So, with a heavy breath, he made the choice to step back. He thanked her silently, with a look that said goodbye and gratitude all at once. Then he walked away into the dark, disappearing down the wet street, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps and the ache of something pure undone by prejudice. Evelyn stood there for a long time, her heart splitting between fury and grief. The city lights blurred through her tears. In that moment, she realized that no matter how high she had climbed, she was still shackled to a system that measured worth by the color of a man's skin and the weight of his wallet. That night, she went home to her sleeping son and sat by his bedside, staring at his small, peaceful face. She promised herself something she hadn't dared before, that one day, she would build a world where men like Malcolm wouldn't have to choose between love and dignity. And though she didn't know it yet, Fate was already working quietly to keep that promise alive. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the city in shades of amber and rust. Time had moved forward, but for Evelyn, something within her had remained suspended in that moment, the night she watched Malcolm disappear into the rain. The world had resumed its pace, meetings continued, profits rose, but inside, she felt the absence of something rare: authenticity. After the gala incident, the board's attitude toward her changed completely. The smiles became forced. The respect became conditional. Investors grew concerned about image, a polite way of saying they no longer approved of her humanity. Within weeks, Evelyn was pressured into stepping down. The official announcement called it a mutual transition toward new opportunities. But the truth was colder. She had been quietly exiled from the empire she built because she refused to bow her head to prejudice. Yet, something remarkable happened in the silence that followed her fall. Without the constant noise of power, Evelyn began to hear herself again. For the first time in years, she woke without alarms. She made breakfast with her son, walked him to school, and felt the sun on her face. It was strange, freeing, and painful all at once. Losing her title had stripped away her armor, but it also revealed what truly mattered: kindness, courage, and truth. And in the quiet corners of her thoughts, there was still Malcolm. The man who had walked away not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. Months passed before she saw him again. It happened on an ordinary afternoon in the community district. Evelyn had been attending a meeting for a local youth development project, hoping to invest her time where it mattered most. The center was buzzing with energy, kids laughing, paint on their hands, music spilling from the rooms. And there, in the back garage, she saw him. Malcolm stood over an old sedan, surrounded by a group of teenage boys watching in awe as he taught them the art of rebuilding an engine. His voice carried calm authority, his hands moved with confidence and care. He looked happier, fuller, like a man who had finally found his purpose again. Evelyn didn't move at first. She just watched. The pride swelling in her chest was quiet but immense. The man who once had only $5 to his name now had something richer than money: respect, community, and self-worth. When he finally noticed her standing there, his expression froze for a heartbeat, then softened into something like peace. The same silence that had once connected them returned, only now it carried no shame, just understanding. Over time, their paths intertwined again, this time without pretense or fear. They began to rebuild a friendship rooted in something purer than circumstance. Evelyn helped expand the community program through her business connections, securing grants that funded new equipment, scholarships, and mentorship opportunities. Malcolm became its heart and soul, guiding dozens of kids who reminded him of himself, those who had talent but no chances, drive but no direction. Together, they transformed that small community garage into a beacon of second chances. Reporters began to take notice, not of scandal, but of impact. Articles appeared about a former CEO and a mechanic changing young lives through compassion and skill. Neither of them sought the attention. They simply kept working, side by side, letting their actions speak for what society had once tried to shame. Years later, on the anniversary of the night they first met, the community center held a celebration to honor its founders. Children who had grown into young adults returned to share stories of how the program changed their lives. Some had become engineers, others teachers, one even a social worker. As speeches filled the air and laughter rippled through the crowd, Evelyn looked at Malcolm standing among them, still humble, still grounded. He caught her gaze, smiled faintly, and in that look lived everything they had endured: the humiliation, the defiance, the resilience, and the quiet triumph of surviving with integrity intact. In that moment, Evelyn realized something profound. Society had measured them both by false standards: status, wealth, race. But in the end, it was character that had written their legacy. Because sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't happen in boardrooms or protests. They happen when ordinary people refuse to surrender their humanity. Malcolm's $5 had once represented his limits. Now, They symbolized how far dignity could stretch when guided by faith, patience, and love. The single mother and the man the world tried to overlook had not just found redemption, they had redefined it. As the evening sun dipped below the skyline, Evelyn stood before the crowd, her voice trembling but firm. She spoke not about wealth or success, but about seeing people for who they truly are. She reminded them that kindness was not charity, it was justice. That every time we choose empathy over judgment, we rewrite the story of what it means to be human. When she finished, applause filled the room, not for her title, but for her truth. Malcolm stood a few feet away, eyes glistening. He didn't need to say anything. She didn't either. Because in that silence, they both knew they had built something far greater than love alone. They had built hope. The same restaurant that had once humiliated him had long since closed down. But if you were to pass that corner today, you'd find a mural on the wall, painted by one of the boys from the program. It shows a black man in a worn suit jacket sitting by a window, waiting, not for pity, but for possibility. Above him, in bold colors, the words read,